The courtroom falls silent as a confident black woman walks in commanding attention, but a stern white officer blocks her path, demanding she leave, convinced she doesn't belong. Tension crackles in the air as whispers ripple through the crowd, but just as he's about to forcibly escort her out, a senior judge bangs the gavel and says a single word that stops everyone cold. Counsel. In that moment, perceptions shatter, and the truth begins to unfold. She's not only allowed in that courtroom, she's about to lead it. What follows is a powerful unraveling of assumptions, authority, and justice that will leave everyone questioning what respect truly looks like and who really holds power when prejudice meets the law. Judge Leah Marshall was running late. As she hurried toward the New Orleans courthouse, her mind was already on the high-profile racial profiling case she was about to preside over. The trial, centered around a young black man, Kevin Daniels, wrongfully arrested in his own neighborhood, could set a precedent for Louisiana. Rain clouds gathered above the historic courthouse, casting long shadows over the marble steps. Leah, dressed in a crisp navy suit and low heels, maneuvered through the side alley, hoping to avoid the throng of reporters clustered near the main entrance. Her leather briefcase swung at her side, containing meticulously prepared notes, exhibits, and a copy of the Constitution she always kept with her, a symbol of the law she had sworn to uphold. Just as she neared the service entrance, a stern voice called out, "Ma'am, I need to see some identification." A young white officer stepped out from behind a pillar. Officer Bill Wilkins, judging by the name stitched on his chest. He looked barely 30, his posture rigid, his gaze unreadable. Leah instinctively slowed, adjusting her expression into one of polite authority. She had learned long ago that any sudden reaction could be misinterpreted. "I'm Judge Marshall," she said, holding out her judicial ID. "I'm presiding over a trial that starts in 10 minutes. Wilkins barely looked at the badge, his eyes fixed on her face. "There's been an incident nearby. You match the description of someone involved. I need to question you." Leah's heart pounded. The weight of generations seemed to press down on her chest. She drew in a slow breath, steadying herself. She knew this moment would have felt familiar to many before her, and to Kevin Daniels, whose case she was now late for. "Officer Wilkins, you're making a serious mistake," she said, her voice calm but tight. "I suggest you contact your supervisor immediately." Wilkins didn't budge. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but he masked it quickly. "Protocol is protocol, ma'am. You can cooperate, or I can escort you for questioning." Leah stood still, every inch of her radiating restraint, but inside a storm was rising. "Bill, stand down." The voice came from behind. Sergeant Michael Harris emerged from a patrol car idling nearby. The veteran officer strode forward with a blend of authority and familiarity, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "That's Judge Marshall," he said. "She's here to oversee the Daniels case." Wilkins blinked, surprise flashing across his face, followed quickly by embarrassment. I wasn't informed, sir." "Because you assumed," Harris replied curtly. "Now move." Wilkins stepped aside without another word. Leah nodded her thanks to Harris, though her jaw was clenched. She stepped past the officer, heels clicking against the stone floor as she entered the courthouse. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear. She had long since learned to carry herself with grace under pressure, but from fury. The marble interior of the courthouse welcomed her with its cold grandeur. Security officers at the entrance nodded respectfully as she passed, but the pit in her stomach remained. The irony of what had just transpired was suffocating. She was about to preside over a case that symbolized systemic injustice, only to become a target of the same bias moments before. She ascended the grand staircase slowly, collecting herself. Her chambers were on the second floor, overlooking the courthouse lawn. As she stepped inside, her assistant, Tasha, looked up from the desk. "You okay, Judge? You're a bit flushed." Leah offered a tight smile. "Had a small delay downstairs. Let's get ready. I want the courtroom settled in 5 minutes." Tasha nodded and sprang into action. Leah sat behind her desk briefly, closing her eyes. Kevin Daniels' file lay open before her. A 22-year-old man arrested while jogging in his own neighborhood, accused of casing homes despite carrying nothing more than a water bottle and his cell phone. The officers had claimed he was behaving suspiciously. No charges had stuck, but Kevin had lost his job, his scholarship, and part of his peace of mind. Leah stood again. She couldn't afford to let this morning's incident cloud her judgment, but she would not forget it either. Not when it mirrored the very issue at hand. When she entered the courtroom, all eyes turned. The gallery was packed. Media cameras were absent by court order, but reporters lined the benches with notepads and recorders ready. Kevin sat at the plaintiff's table, his mother beside him, eyes watchful. The defense team representing the police department looked polished and stoic. Leah took her seat and gavelled the room to order. "Good morning. This court is now in session. The case of Kevin Daniels versus the City of New Orleans Police Department will proceed." Her voice echoed with clarity and force. As the attorneys presented their opening arguments, Leah listened intently, her face unreadable. She took notes, her mind sharp despite the morning's encounter. But beneath the surface, she was simmering. When Kevin took the stand, he spoke with a quiet dignity that pierced the room. He described the morning he was stopped, how 3 squad cars had surrounded him within minutes, how he was ordered to the ground with guns drawn, and how no one had listened when he tried to explain he lived 2 blocks away. "I kept thinking," he said, "this can't be happening to me. I haven't done anything. I'm not a criminal." But they looked at me like I already was. Leah watched the jurors. Some nodded slightly, others looked disturbed. Kevin's mother wiped tears silently. The defense attorney cross-examined him with practiced detachment, suggesting his hoodie, the early hour, and his brisk pace were factors that led officers to suspect him. "You understand why that might appear suspicious, correct?" the attorney asked. Kevin looked directly at the jury. "I understand why they thought it, but that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it justice." There was a pause in the courtroom. Leah felt it ripple like a current. At recess, she returned to her chambers and called Sergeant Harris. "Thank you for earlier," she said simply. "I'm sorry that happened," he replied. "I'll be speaking with Wilkins. He's green, but that's no excuse." "No," Leah agreed, "it's not." As she hung up, she looked at her reflection in the window. She thought of the generations before her who had fought for a seat in a courtroom. She thought of her father, who had marched in Selma, and her mother, who had once been denied a job at a law firm because she wore her hair natural. She thought of the fact that even now, in her position of authority, she was still not immune. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tasha. "The press is asking for a statement. Do you want to respond about the incident this morning?" Leah typed back, "Not yet. The trial speaks louder." She returned to the bench as the afternoon session began. Witness after witness took the stand, officers defending their decisions, neighbors describing Kevin as quiet and respectful, experts testifying on racial bias in policing. And throughout it all, Leah remained focused. But every now and then, her eyes would drift to the back of the courtroom, where Officer Wilkins now stood silently, observing. He hadn't expected to see her again that day, but he needed to. And perhaps, Leah thought, that was justice too. To be seen, fully and clearly, by the ones who had once refused to look. After the trial, Judge Leah Marshall made no statements to the crowd. Her presence was dignified, her face unreadable as she exited through the side door of the courthouse. The weight of the gavel still echoed in her hand, and the voices chanting outside faded behind her with every step she took into the dim light of early evening. But as she rounded the corner of the building, her composure faltered. There, standing alone with his uniform loosened and his expression conflicted, was Officer Bill Wilkins. She stopped. He did not move. "Judge Marshall," he said quietly, his voice gravelly and rough, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Leah didn't respond at first. The layers of emotion inside her, anger, fatigue, disappointment, kept her still. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, clipped. "But it did, and it keeps happening. To people like Kevin. To people like me." Her words didn't rise in volume, but they struck with the force of a verdict. Wilkins took a step forward, then stopped himself, uncertain. "I know," he said. "Or I think I know now. I don't know how to undo it. What I thought I understood about policing, about keeping people safe, I was taught to see danger in difference. I never even questioned it." Leah looked at him, searching for signs of deflection, for excuses, but found none. Just a man whose world had shifted beneath his feet. Still, skepticism held its place in her heart. "You don't get points for realizing the fire you've been feeding," she said, her voice firm. "You just get the chance to stop throwing wood on it." Wilkins nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that since yesterday. I went home and looked at my old reports. Do you know how many times I used vague language, suspicious behavior, uncooperative? Code words for didn't look right, for black or brown or poor." He rubbed the back of his neck. "That morning I stopped you. I didn't see a judge. I didn't even see a woman. I saw a threat, because that's what I've been trained to see. And I hate that." Leah folded her arms across her chest. "What are you going to do about it?" Before he could answer, a familiar voice cut through the moment. "This is how it starts, Judge," Sergeant Michael Harris said as he approached. His presence was steady, confident, and his gaze lingered on Wilkins. One case, one officer at a time. Wilkins looked at Harris, something close to relief flashing across his face. "Sarge, I owe you too. You vouched for Judge Marshall yesterday. You stopped me before I made a bigger mistake." "You already made a mistake," Harris said plainly, "but you stopped digging. That counts for something." The silence between the three of them stretched, not awkward, but thick with reckoning. Wilkins turned to Leah again. "I want to do better. I need to. I can't go back to the department like nothing happened. If I do, I'll just fall back into the same habits." Leah raised an eyebrow. "So what are you proposing?" "I want to help change how we train. I've already requested reassignment to the Community Engagement Unit. I want to face the people we've hurt. Not with apologies, with action." Harris crossed his arms, watching Wilkins carefully. "You're stepping into something deeper than policy and procedure. This isn't a checklist you can complete. It's uncomfortable. You'll be challenged every day." "I know," Wilkins said, "but I need to be part of the solution." Leah studied him. It was hard to tell whether this was the start of something authentic or a reflexive attempt at redemption. But part of leadership, she knew, was recognizing the moments when the door cracked open and deciding whether or not to hold it for someone else to walk through. "If you're serious," she said, "then you need to show up. Not just when it's easy, not just when it looks good, when it's hard, when it costs you something." "I understand." "Do you?" she asked, her eyes sharp. "Because understanding isn't about guilt, it's about doing the work, when the protests die down, when no one is watching." Wilkins lowered his head. "I'm ready to try." Just then, a group of community leaders emerged from the front of the courthouse, including Kevin Daniels and his mother. Kevin caught Leah's eye and gave her a quiet nod of gratitude. She returned it with a solemn nod. Kevin had faced humiliation, injustice, and pain, and had stood up with courage. He hadn't just testified. He had told his truth in a place that too often silenced voices like his. As the group walked past, Wilkins stepped aside. Kevin paused briefly near him. The two locked eyes. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The tension in that silent moment was palpable. A man who had taken away another man's dignity now stood in the full light of accountability. "I want to talk to him someday," Wilkins said softly, once Kevin passed. "When he's ready, if he ever wants to." "That's not for you to decide," Leah replied. "I know." The three of them stood outside the courthouse steps as dusk began to fall. The gold light of the setting sun cast long shadows behind them. Leah thought of the generations who had fought for justice before her, of her grandmother, who once marched through Baton Rouge demanding equal rights, of her law school professors who taught her that law without compassion was just control. A reporter rounded the corner and spotted them, camera raised. Leah waved her off. "No statements today," she said firmly. The reporter backed away respectfully. Harris turned to Leah. "You know, that case will probably be taught in law schools one day. Daniels v. NOPD. Leah gave a half smile. "Let's hope the lessons last longer than the headlines." "They will," Harris said, "if we make them." Wilkins looked out at the courthouse steps. "I used to think justice meant putting people in cuffs. Now I don't know what it means." "Good," Leah said. Doubt can be a sign of growth. Just don't stop there. They stood in silence again. The courthouse behind them loomed large, its columns and history casting long shadows. It had seen injustice. It had seen change. Today, it had seen both. Leah took a step forward, adjusting the robe that now felt heavier with the responsibility it carried. The road ahead was uncertain, winding and slow, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like something real might follow this verdict. Not just press releases and talking points, but truth, movement, accountability. As they began to part ways, Harris offered a firm nod. "We'll be watching." Wilkins met his gaze. "I hope you do." The courthouse steps were quieter now. Reporters had packed up their microphones and cameras, the crowd had dispersed, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Judge Leah Marshall took a deep breath as she stepped outside through the side exit, away from the front where a media frenzy still buzzed, dissecting every word of the trial that had just concluded. Kevin Daniels was now a free man. The jury's decision had been swift once Officer Wilkins' testimony collapsed under its own weight. But for Leah, the real weight of the trial hadn't lifted. Not yet. She paused mid-step. Just ahead, leaning uncomfortably against the brick wall, stood Officer Bill Wilkins. He wasn't in uniform now. He had shed it after testifying, but his posture was still stiff, as if he were still clutching the authority that uniform lent him. His eyes met hers, uncertain and downcast, like a student waiting to be reprimanded. "Judge Marshall," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, carrying the kind of hesitation that signaled he had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times, but still didn't know how to begin. Leah stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, her jaw set in a line that said she was still carrying the confrontation outside the courthouse in her bones. "What do you want, Officer Wilkins?" she asked, her voice cool but firm. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Didn't mean for what to happen? For Kevin to be arrested in front of his own home? For you to lie under oath? For me to be questioned like a criminal on my way to preside over a courtroom?" Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't lie. At least I didn't think I was lying. I thought I was doing my job." "Your job?" Her voice was sharp now, sharper than she had intended, but the edge in it was earned. "What part of your job tells you that a young black man standing outside his house is suspicious? What part of your training made you believe I, a black woman walking into the courthouse, needed to be detained before I could even show my credentials?" "I had a feeling," he muttered, eyes now locked on the ground. "That feeling is exactly what this case was about," she said. "That's not a gut instinct, that's bias, that's conditioning, and that's what almost ruined Kevin's life." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm trying, Judge. I swear I'm trying to understand. But it's not easy to unlearn what I've been taught my whole life." A long silence stretched between them. Leah studied him, not with contempt, but with the measured scrutiny of someone who had spent years dissecting truth from performance in a courtroom. Was this remorse real, or just fear? Fear of suspension, of demotion, of public shame? Behind her, the echo of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Sergeant Michael Harris emerged from the building, his eyes scanning the quiet scene with practiced ease. A man of quiet strength, he had spent decades on the force navigating two worlds, the badge he wore and the skin he lived in. He gave Wilkins a long, assessing look before turning to Leah. "You okay, Judge?" Leah nodded slowly. "We're just talking." Harris stepped beside her, folding his arms. "You should listen, Wilkins, not just talk." Wilkins nodded, his mouth tightening. "That's what I'm trying to do." "Then hear this," Harris said, voice low but clear. "You've got two paths in front of you. One leads back to everything you've ever known, your comfort zone, your silence, your gut feelings. The other leads somewhere harder. It'll make you uncomfortable. It'll demand that you confront every assumption you were raised with. But it's the only path that leads to real justice." Wilkins blinked as if hearing something he hadn't expected. Leah spoke again, more gently now. You weren't the first officer to act on bias. And sadly, you won't be the last. But what you do next matters. It matters for Kevin. It matters for every person like him. And it matters for you. He looked up at her, the beginnings of something, shame, maybe, or reflection, flickering in his eyes. What if I want to change, but I don't know how? You start by listening, Leah said. You read. You learn the history they didn't teach you in the academy. You walk into rooms where you're the minority, and you sit with that discomfort. You ask yourself why it makes you uneasy, and you don't expect a pat on the back for doing what should have been done all along. Wilkins nodded slowly. I want to try. Then prove it, Harris said, to us, to yourself. One case doesn't erase a system, one trial doesn't clean the slate, but it's a start. For a moment, no one said anything. The wind rustled through the live oaks lining the street. A car honked in the distance. Somewhere, life continued as if nothing had changed. But something had. Not enough, not nearly enough, but something. Leah turned to leave but paused. You've got work to do, Officer Wilkins, and it's going to take more than words. Wilkins watched her walk away, Harris beside her. He didn't follow. Instead, he remained rooted on the courthouse steps, not because he didn't care, but because he was starting to realize how much he didn't know. Inside the building, court staff were still clearing paperwork. Kevin Daniels was surrounded by his family, their embrace tight, tearful. His mother held him like she did when he was a boy. His younger sister looked up at him like he was a hero. To them, he was. He had stood his ground, spoken his truth, and, against the odds, been believed. As Leah stepped back inside briefly to collect her robe and notes, she caught a glimpse of Kevin and his family. Their eyes met, and Kevin gave a slight nod. Not of thanks, though it contained gratitude, but of mutual understanding. They had both walked through the fire today, and they had both come out with scars, but also with strength. Clerks offered polite congratulations. Colleagues stopped her in the hall to commend her poise. But Leah wasn't looking for praise. She was thinking about all the other Kevins who never got to see a courtroom, about the ones who weren't lucky enough to get cameras, lawyers, or fair verdicts, the ones silenced before they could speak. She paused outside her chambers, her reflection in the glass catching her off guard. She looked tired, but underneath the fatigue was steel. This fight wasn't new to her. It was generational, and it would be waiting for her again tomorrow. Down the hall, Sergeant Harris caught up to her once more. You did good today, he said, keeping his voice low. I did my job, she replied. And that's exactly what Wilkins needed to see. They stood there in silence for a while. Then Harris added, This is how it starts, Judge. One case, one officer at a time. Leah gave a quiet nod. She knew that path, slow, uphill, full of setbacks, but she also knew the alternative, and she wasn't willing to accept that future. Justice, real justice, wasn't about the big verdicts or headline-grabbing trials. It was about the quiet shifts that happened afterward, the uncomfortable conversations, the public reckonings, the private realizations. And if Officer Wilkins was even a little changed by what had happened today, then maybe, just maybe, something had begun. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.